The blockbuster movie Titanic has renewed fascination with sunken ships and buried treasure, but you don't have to look far to find a fascinating story down under. Chris Peterson joins us from the Satellite Center with a shipwreck story from Lake Erie, and this ship actually started out in southern Asia.
That's right, Jeff. It was built in Burma in the 1700s, and over the years it sailed around the world and touched thousands of lives. In fact, the spirit of the success is still very much alive because of all the people she touched, including a young woman from Australia who searched for years to find the success.
I'm ready to go. Can't wait to get in. Gonna go down on the success.
Melissa Ekard had never even heard of Lake Erie when she made her first trip to Ohio. She just knew part of her family legacy was somewhere at the bottom of the lake.
My grandma, Mama, who grew up on the ship, and there's my mum, Edna, and my dad, Dave. They all came for the boat ride today, for the dive. And before I dove, I made sure to have my complimentary ticket. Of course, it's not good on Saturday, Sunday, or holidays, but today's Friday, so we're in luck.
By most accounts, the ship's success was built as a trade ship in Burma in 1790. In the 1840s, she carried immigrants from England to Australia. But by the early 1850s, the success became a floating prison in Sydney Harbor, and by some accounts, a torture chamber. Melissa's great-grandfather, Joseph J.C. Harvey, found a great deal of potential in the prisoners' tales of torture and horror. He was an entrepreneur who turned the success into a floating museum after its prison days were over. He recreated the so-called hell ship and the devices designed to torture the prisoners, the cat-o'-nine tails, the compulsory bath, and the crouch iron. Thousands of the curious lined up for tickets.
Oh, so many people visited the ship, and I remember my grandmother saying that one time it was visited by royalty, and they didn't know until, after the fact, and then there was a banner hung to proclaim the fact.
J.C. Harvey lived on the ship with his family for months at a time and traveled from port to port in Europe. His daughter Hilda never forgot her adventures on the high seas.
Kids playing on deck and climbing up masts and chasing animals that they had on board for only a short time because that didn't go too well. The monkey taken off and things like this, so of course that wasn't well. But playing in the cabin and singing songs for the cook, so we'd make him pancakes. I'd sing him Scottish songs and cheer him up because he was lonely,
But after several successful years of traveling and lecturing, Harvey's wife became ill. The success was sold to an American, and the Harvey family lost track of her until many, many years later, when Hilda Harvey began looking for her old home.
There's a master rig.
Big straight.
Melissa picked up the search when her mom and grandma died. She believes they guided her to the people who knew where the ship was, and she immediately made plans to visit Ohio to dive on the success. In the cabins where her great-grandfather once lived with his family, catfish now lay their eggs. The decks, once covered with curious visitors, are now covered with zebra mussels. But to Melissa, the ship just looked like home.
The first time I touched it, I was just thinking about my family. I felt like I made it. I was thinking about my grandma as a little girl on the boat, and as I was, swimming along and touching it, I was thinking, oh, she was walking on the deck of this boat, and I imagined her playing and everything, and yeah, a lot of emotion, yeah. And I'd come up and show my dad a piece of the ship, the first, bit that we brought up, and yeah, he couldn't believe it. He was just so happy, thrilled. We really felt that, Mum was there, my grandma was there with us.
Melissa's hoping to keep her family legacy alive by writing a book on the success. Her grandmother recounted her memories of the ship on cassette tapes before she died, and she plans to use those stories in her book, Jeff.
How'd the ship end up in Lake Erie?
Good question. You remember I said when J.C. Harvey's wife became ill, he sold the success to an American investor who brought the ship to U.S. audiences, and eventually it came to Lake Erie, and we'll have that chapter of the story tomorrow night.
Thanks very much, Chris. Also tomorrow night, Chris will show us what the success shares in common with the Titanic. It was a trade ship, an emigrant ship, and a prison ship in Australia before it eventually became a floating museum. Chris showed us the beginnings of the ship's success last night. Tonight she joins us from the Satellite Center again with another chapter of the story. Now, last night you told us how the success toured Europe, but how did it end up in Lake Erie?
Well, Jeff, it was so profitable touring in Europe, a group of American investors wanted to capitalize on the ship's success. Northwest Ohio would eventually become the ship's final resting place, but the journey began from a port in England as another more notorious ship set sail for America.
People around the world watched as the luxury cruise ship Titanic began her maiden voyage in 1912. There was so much fanfare for Titanic, a much more primitive ship named Success received no attention as it set off for America on the very same day. 93 days after the world heard the grim fate of the Titanic, the Success sailed triumphantly into Boston Harbor to begin her new life in America. An entrepreneur named Joseph Harvey had toured Europe with the Success, entertaining thousands of people with his recreation of the Australian prison ship. American Captain D.H. Smith took command in 1912, bringing the one-of-a-kind ship to American audiences. People from Detroit, Cleveland, even Toledo paid 25 or 50 cents to see the Convict ship.
The Success ship actually sailed into port, would spend a number of days or perhaps even longer on the tour, on the circuit, so to speak. And they would pay a decent sum of money for this entertainment, if you will.
Audiences were entertained, sometimes shocked by what they saw. Torture devices supposedly used to make life miserable for the convicts on board. Men were flogged with the cat-o'-nine tails, then put into something called a compulsory bath, where cold salt water would be scrubbed into their open wounds. Legend has it so many men died from loss of blood here, they called it the coffin bath. Prisoners who tried to escape the ship were put into something called the crouch iron for up to 10 hours at a time.
And so it's kind of a general history lesson in man's inhumanity to man. And there was a little hype involved. They had quite a bit of fun with their educational process. And so you see some relics, if you will, that sort of illustrate, torture methods, whatever. But it's, as I said, it's illustrative.
The ship was a crowd pleaser and very successful financially. 25 and 50-cent tickets added up quickly, netting big profits in the 1920s.
The Success was so successful as a floating museum for J.C. Harvey and Captain Smith that a man from Port Clinton named Harry Van Stack decided to try his hand at running the business. Over the years, Captain Van Stack amassed quite a collection of memorabilia from the ship, and soon after he died, his wife donated the entire collection here to the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Center in Fremont.
There are boxes of photos and artifacts here, everything from uniforms to shackles to wax figures.
This fellow, obviously, I'm sure, was a famous prisoner that supposedly had spent time there. I'm sure was mistreated, was imprisoned for some sort of heinous crime, and this is what's left of the poor fellow.
Harry Van Stack was a lecturer on the ship when he met a young tourist from Port Clinton he just couldn't live without. They got married and shared some wonderful years touring with the Success. Mrs. Van Stack hoped donating the collection would help keep those memories alive.
The last gasp of this ship, if you will, as we understand it, Mrs. Van Stack told a wonderful story about following her husband, in effect, she driving the automobile on shore and keeping an eye on him as he sailed it back to Port Clinton, if memory serves me correctly, and there it stayed for a while, sort of moldering into the water.
The next chapter of the Success was big news in Port Clinton. The Success caught fire in the middle of the lake, and people were talking about that fire for years. We'll show you the flames and meet the man who caught it on tape tomorrow night. Jeff.
Jay Snyder at the Hayes Museum alluded to the fact that torture devices displayed on the Success were not really used.
Well, there's a lot of legend involved. We know for a fact the Success was used as a prison ship and at one time even housed female and juvenile inmates, but there seems to be a bit of creative license used to illustrate that fact. J.C. Harvey's been compared to P.T. Barnum in some books.
And there's one born every moment, right?
Right.
Thanks very much, Chris. The Australians, by the way, have never been very pleased with the way the Success portrayed the treatment of prisoners. For years, they denied the Success even existed. Later, they acknowledged the ship, but denied all stories of torture or mistreatment of the convicts. She left England the same day as the Titanic, but the Australian convict ship Success made it to America. And once she got here, she made a fortune touring the Great Lakes as a floating museum. But when her touring days were over, the Success still made quite an impression on people in this area. Chris joins us from the Satellite Center to tell us how.
Jeff, there's something a little mesmerizing about the Success. Photographer Phil Drexler and I were instantly captivated by the story of the convict ship. And the thing we both find so fascinating is the number of people whose lives have been touched by Success.
It's indestructible.
It's just a small piece of wood, but to Lee Bracken, this relic from the ship Success is an instant time machine. Lee was just a young boy in Cleveland when he became fascinated with ships. He can still remember the day the convict ship Success pulled into the East 9th Street Pier.
The rigging was beautiful, and they had all kinds of wax figures, and they had built it up to the point, they were all murderers or desperate people.
A group of investors brought the Success to America after it made a fortune touring Europe. Visitors were shocked by the tales of torture aboard the prison ship from Australia. Lee Bracken had never seen anything like it.
They had one room that fascinated me. It wasn't very large. It was like a little closet almost, and it was built special so that you couldn't lie down, you couldn't sit down, you couldn't stand up. And they would lock them in there as punishment. And I guess it was almost worse than solitary because you could never find a way to rest.
While the Success earned a fortune touring the Great Lakes, Lee Bracken settled down in Port Clinton. He often remembered the Success as his love for sailing grew. In the 1940s, the Success's touring days were over. She was docked in Sandusky for years. And when a man named Walter Colby tried to tow the boat to Port Clinton, she got stuck on a sandbar. Lee Bracken was reunited with the Success.
It just settled right on the sand there, and it was quite a picturesque thing. In fact, coming from Toledo, on old Route 2, that's before the new bypass, and you'd see this old boat out there and it looked like the Pilgrim's Landing. And I was fascinated with it.
Lee and his brother-in-law Bob would take friends out in their boat to get a closer look at the Success. But on July 4th, 1946, he couldn't believe what he saw.
I looked out there and I said, my God, Bob, the convict ship is on fire. I could see quite a bit of smoke, not too much flame.
By the time Lee grabbed his camera, it looked like this.
Burned a long time, evidently, that wood being as hard as it was. And I would say that it burned all afternoon and well into the evening and night. And it was kind of sad. I felt that part of my life had left there a little bit. And I'm glad I got it on film.
There wasn't much left when the fire burned out. Eventually, the ship settled to the bottom of the lake. Now a different kind of visitor fills the decks of the Success. Catfish, walleye, and zebra mussels are abundant here. But the story doesn't end at the bottom of the lake. The spirit of the Success lives on through the thousands of people she touched over hundreds of years. People like Lee Bracken, who will never forget the glory days of the prison ship, or the day he saw fire on the water in Lake Erie.
Think of the history of that thing. When you think of it, you were seeing something from the other side of the world.
Lee Bracken actually traveled to Australia to deliver a framed picture of the Success as she burned. The National Maritime Museum there has it on display with some other artifacts relating to the Success, Jeff.
How did the Success catch fire?
Vandals, apparently. It was the 4th of July, and I guess they really wanted to see some fireworks. Lee Bracken eventually found out who said it, but he won't tell anyone who.
Over the past days, I wanted to let you know I've had numerous calls and letters from people who have information or artifacts from the success. And there is so much information that we could not put it all into our 3-part series. So photographer Phil Drexler and I hope to put together a half-hour documentary on the success. So watch for it in the upcoming weeks.
We'll do that. Thanks very much, Chris.